All right, here are the reveals, though. The Grand Plaza. Here we go. Demacia landmark. When an ally is summoned, give it +1/+1 and challenger this round. Huh. That's interesting. So, I mean, it allows you to give something challenger. Immediately to my mind, this is really funny with the Undying, because the Undying, this will give the Undying challenger, excuse me, this will give the Undying challenger every time it gets resummoned, right? Elites will be so annoying. This is a really interesting one. It's so good for the Undying, yeah, and you know the ability to actually like give everything challenger. Like elites might actually be a little spooky. It's interesting. The thing about challenger is you only really need it for one round. So this definitely looks fairly solid. Let's go ahead and keep going. Scouts. Captain Arrika. Spell shield. Play. Capture a unit or landmark. So the spell shield plus the capture is really, really important here. It's a sick combo. And it's an 8/6/6. Sorry, my webcam's in the way. Hang on. I always have to like bounce my webcams in between everywhere. I'm just gonna shrink it. I'm gonna shrink it and I'm gonna put it in the middle. That's the only way. Okay. So, it is capture a unit or landmark. Honestly, the elite keyword, I mean, it's not bad. Like, think of this sort of like Infinite Mind Splitter, where it's like an 8-mana card that comes down and disrupts the board in some kind of major way. Like, this is actually could be a decent stabilizer. And Demacia games go pretty late. All right. Evershade Stalker. 2-mana, 2/2. Shadow Isles. It's ephemeral, fearsome, and this means it can't block. And Nightfall, create a copy of me in a hand. What the hell? Wait, what? That's weird. I mean, it's sort of... Yeah, it looks pretty bad. But it's a really unique concept. Is there some way to use this that I'm not seeing? This card is going to be broken. It's not an exact copy, so you can't like buff it or anything. Combo with P and Z. I have to think more about that one later. Smooth Soloist? Yeah, Smooth Soloist is a sick combo with that. Pesky Specter. Ephemeral. Last Breath. Create 2 copies of me in the enemy deck. That's pretty funny. I mean, you can play this on turn 1. It's a sick combo with Butcher. See, like, I like this design of card. Like, this is actually a well-designed card. It's very unique. Shadow Isles often kind of wanted a 0-mana 1/1. So think about it like... So for a lot of Shadow Isles combo decks, we've used stuff like Caustic Cask just to be able to, you know, work with, you know, our sacrifice tools, our Ravenous Butchers and stuff. So it's just a 0-mana sacrifice target that sometimes makes the opponent draw a useless card halfway through the game, which is kind of a big deal. Like, this card is actually decent. Like, it will be seeing experimentation in some kinds of specific combo decks. Moonlight Affliction. Silence 2 enemy units this round. Nightfall, they can't block this round. Whoa! What? What? Excuse me? What? They can't block this round? So it's just Nightfall, they lose 2 blockers at burst speed? So how you want to use this, the most important thing with this card is like, I mean, you want to follow it up with a fast burst. And a lot of decks, for example, Nightfall decks are already running stuff like Fading Memories. So a very fast, cheap burst, like Fading Memories, into this, into an open attack, and literally deleting 2 blockers is so crazy. And it's got the flexibility of just being a silence. This is really, really important, by the way. This is really, really important. It's a crazy offensive blowout tool because you can delete 2 blockers at burst speed. 2 blockers at burst speed. But on top of being a crazy offensive blowout tool, it has the flexibility of just being a double silence. That's so important, because if a card was a crazy specific blowout tool like this Nightfall ability, it's gonna be bricked out in some situations. You're not always gonna want that, but it has this like major safety net of just being a silence. This card is insane. Solari Sunforger. Daybreak, give me lifesteal this round. 4/5/4. Huh. Well, I mean, so we haven't really had enough Daybreak cards. Like, the Daybreak archetype has felt like it's struggled with just, like, not having quite enough Daybreak cards. A 4-mana 5/4 Stellan, you know what? It's kind of weird. We haven't really seen 4/5/4s in Runeterra. Like, basically at all. I'm sure there's something that exists, but it's not really, like... It hasn't really been seeing decks anyway. It's not that bad of a stat line just because there's not a ton of things at 4 attack. Aggro killer. Yeah, it's kind of like the new Radiant Guardian, right? Like, you can Daybreak this out and it just absolutely trashes aggro matchups. We compare this to, like, Tasty Feyfolk, which is a 3-mana 4/2, and this is a 4-mana 5/4. And that's a pretty big deal because... You know, without 2 health, it's just less vulnerable. And it's got a solid Daybreak. So this card is very good. You'll see it in Daybreak decks. Pretty much, it's flexible depending on how much aggro is in the meta. Healing 5 is pretty good. Yeah. This card's pretty great. You'll definitely see this in Daybreak decks. And probably just in, like, some of the, like, Targon kind of Invoke decks in general. Right? Like, that's a big thing. Not just the Daybreak decks. I mean, but also those, like, kind of like slow Targon Allegiance Invoke style decks often do want, like, a bit of lifesteal like that. Then we've got Targon's Peak, a landmark. Round start, reduce the cost of a random card in each player's hand to 0 this round. Holy shit. Oh. What? What? So this is a very weird card. This is not bad. There's a few different ways we can use this card. The biggest way is, okay, so the 2 different ways we can use this card. We can try to, like, create a deck with a bunch of expensive units that you just want to cheat one out early to try to win the game. And when we have expensive units, like this, you'll probably combine this with Freljord, I think. But honestly, there are some other ideas. When we have a lot of expensive units, we can cheat out early. You know, like Aurelion Sol, maybe Tryndamere, and then maybe some of Freljord's big top end. I could actually see going back to She Who Wanders potentially in a deck like this, because She Who Wanders is actually really good when you can get it earlier. When you play it on, like, even when you ramp into it, when you play it on, like, turn 8 or 9, She Who Wanders is fairly often going to be, like... She Who Wanders is kind of like... That kind of effect that late into the game can end up not doing enough. But when you can get that effect on, like, turn 6, sometimes it just nukes the opponent's weak board. So that's pretty crazy. It reduces Field Rush to 0 as well. Yeah, you can reduce Field Rush to 0 as well. So basically, you'd run it, like, I think it kind of has to be with Freljord in that, like, you know, Field Rush, Targon style deck. And it sort of incentivizes the rest of the deck to be built a little bit different. Like, instead of running a lot of the, like, cheap units, like 2-mana cards, like Troll Scavenger or maybe even Avarosan Sentry, you could build even cheaper. Because you don't want medium-sized cards with this one. It's kind of weird, right? You want super expensive cards for this to discount, or if you can't have those, super cheap cards so that you can play them guaranteed so that they're not in the pool of targets for this card. I have a question. Round start, is this before draw or after draw? Before draw? Yeah, that's what I thought. Which is crazy. That's a big deal because it allows you to control this effect a lot more. Yeah, wow. I mean, this is a crazy card. It's definitely like a very Hearthstone-y kind of effect. Like, for sure, we will see some people just feel the rush on turn 6. Like, Jesus Christ. That is so crazy. We'll have to see how this plays out. I do think, like, at the end of the day, it's an interesting card that there's a lot to build around. It's not literally purely random because you can sort of control the RNG and the opponent has some amount of counterplay to it. Like, you can be like, it does create deck building decisions, and it does have this effect of like forcing you to play in a pretty specific way. But at the end of the day, I mean, it will still this is going to be a very random effect. Like, this is going to be a huge blowout depending on what it hits on turn 5 or 6, right? Well, I guess turn 6 or 7. Like, that's, you can catalyst or weirding into this. Yeah, you can play it on turn 4, so yeah, 5 or 6. Like, Jesus. This might be my favorite card in the game. Yeah. I think, like, so a lot of people are saying this is, like, a crazy Hearthstone RNG card. And, I mean, honestly, I'm pretty skeptical of this as well. What I will say is, like, I do think that it at least creates a lot of interesting decision points. Whereas there are a lot of, like, truly RNG designs that have no upside and don't create interesting decision points. So we'll have to see how this plays out. I'm pretty skeptical, guys. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There's a chance this card could be as trolly, as toxic as some of you guys think. It's very, 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 very possible. I'm willing to give this one the benefit of the doubt a little bit. And I want to see, you know, maybe there's a chance that this just ends up being less competitive than we think. Or B, it's maybe there's just enough of a way to make it consistent enough with enough of a cost that it ends up not being that kind of like crazy blowout. Either way, today's reveals are actually pretty interesting. When we compare them to like yesterday's reveals, you know, it's not a hot take to say that like they're fairly underwhelming. We got a bunch of like pretty meh cards, and to be perfectly honest, I actually think the Scargrounds isn't that great either. I know a lot of people, you know, are hyped for that, but today's reveals, there's a ton of viability here. There's a ton. Like, basically all these cards that we're seeing are all like to different degrees viable. There's none of these cards that I look at and I think is pure trash. Maybe Evershade Stalker is the closest to that, but even this card, it has such a unique effect that I can totally see it hitting some kinds of weird combo decks. Like, for example, yeah, Smooth Soloist Shadow Isles has actually not been that bad. And yeah, I could see it being like an interesting combo piece and some stuff like that, right? It pops off as a Nocturne finisher. Yeah. This one, like, even the worst card here, which is, I guess, Evershade, I feel has a ton of potential, and I can't immediately rule that out, which is really cool. So, I guess going back through Grand Plaza, I'm a little skeptical in general of these kinds of, like, 3-mana landmark effects that require you to have units. But at the very least, it's something that I think can make certain Demacia decks potentially a lot more annoying. It's a very scalable effect. And usually Challenger is a keyword that you only really need for one round anyway. So that works fairly well. Captain Arrika, I think this card's actually kind of underrated. I think this is going to have a fairly similar impact to like Mind Splitter, where because it has Spell Shield, it actually has a lot to remove. Right? Like, it can really mess with a lot of game plans that they don't have the ability to kill. Card's crazy. It's a 6/6 with Spell Shield for free, basically, since Detain is 5. Kind of. I mean, at that point in the game, it's more about the turn where it's coming down rather than the total mana it costs. And Detain can come down like 4 turns earlier. But, yeah. Captain Arrika is pretty decent at the very least. We already went over Stalker. Then we've got Pesky Specter. It's just like, it's a combo piece. The thing is, I can tell you right now, this card will absolutely see play. Because there have been so many, and there will always be some Shadow Isles decks that just want like a 0-mana sacrifice target. And this one just has a free last breath effect on top of that. It's just like, it's going to be fairly niche. I don't see this hitting like the most powerful Shadow Isles decks, but there will be some like Shadow Isles combo decks that will play this card. This card just looks kind of broken. Jesus. I mean, you can use this. You can use this with so much. A lot of people look at this and like they're thinking about Nightfall aggro with like Shadow Isles, but I mean, you can use this with everything, right? Like, imagine this in like you can use this in like a Leona deck, right? Leona's always looking for like a big blowout there, and you can easily use a Daybreak into this Nightfall. Like, this card just seems absolutely insane. To be honest, I think a lot of I see a lot of people hating on Targon's Peak, but if anything, Moonlight Affliction is crazier. We'll see. And then Solar Sunforger is a really solid card. You'll run this in not just full Daybreak decks, but any sort of slow Targon deck. Like, will run this card. This card's a great anti-aggro tool. So yeah, overall, like it's really hilarious when we compare this to yesterday. Yesterday had a bunch of kind of like fairly poop cards. Today, basically everything's viable. Like there's a lot of cards here. Most of the cards here will be hitting competitive decks. So pretty crazy. All right, guys, that's my initial impressions. God, there's actually a lot to talk about today. What do you guys think? Podcast time?